Let's welcome Governor Kim Reynolds and Governor Asa Hutchinson.
Are we on? Yes, we are. Here we go. Well, what a beautiful day at the Iowa State Fair. Hey, Asa, I want you to know this is what the weather is always like in Iowa.
It's perfect as
it's
always.
It's perfect as always. We can't hardly believe it. The fact that I'm at the Iowa State Fair with a jacket on is absolutely crazy. But I want to say welcome to all of you back to the Fairside Chats. I appreciate that very much. It's an opportunity for me to interview Republican presidential candidates as we lead into the First in the Nation caucus here in Iowa on January 15th. And I am so happy to be joined by a former colleague. I actually got to serve with Governor Hutchinson when he was governor of Arkansas. And so I've worked with him on a bunch of things. But Asa, welcome to the Iowa, or welcome back, I should say, to the Iowa State Fair.
Well, thank you, Governor Reynolds. Kim, what an incredible job that you have done. Give Governor Reynolds a round of applause. Just, you know, I've traveled Iowa, and I know how loved you are. And your leadership has been extraordinary. And I remember coming at your invitation here where you brought in teachers and educators so we could talk about computer science education.
Yep.
And so your leadership in that, which I have also pushed in Arkansas, has been extraordinary.
And I got to go down and join you, and it was a phenomenal conference as well, talking about how important computer science and STEM is. Well, listen, I thought to start out with, you were recently at the Lincoln Day dinner, and we appreciated you being a part of that. But you talked about, you served as the youngest U.S. attorney in the country, and you talked about navigating a hostage crisis in that role. So can you talk a little bit about how your time as a U.S. attorney really shaped your career in public service? You've been in a lot of different areas, but I thought that was fascinating.
Well, it's really important today. I mean, yesterday, as many of you saw on the national news, another smash and grab theft in, I believe it was a Nordstrom store in California. And I'm, for one, tired of this. It is a disregard of the rule of law in our country. It is almost close to anarchy, and it concerns whether you live in Iowa or whether you live in California. This type of lawlessness is not what America's about. And so I go back to my days as United States Attorney, a federal prosecutor, and we had a terrorist group in northern Arkansas, and we were not going to let them commit acts of violence without confronting the law. We didn't ignore it. Now, it surprised me that we had an armed encampment and the FBI summoned me. They sent a plane for me and said, we need you up here in the hills of Arkansas because the leader of the terrorist organization refuses to surrender and come out. And so I got up there and got out of the vehicle, and they threw me a bulletproof vest and said, you might need this. And I'm thinking, this is not why I went to law school. But 3 days of negotiation. I was in the Ford location assisting the negotiation. They surrendered. I prosecuted them on racketeering charges and convicted them and sent them to prison. But that was my time as United States Attorney. It also is relevant because of the issues that we face with fentanyl today. Yeah. And every generation faces a challenge with drug use, and I faced that during the Reagan administration, and we went after the supply, we went after the dealers in our community, and we also understood the importance of educating. And I want to applaud you, Governor Reynolds, Kim, for you having the fentanyl conference there that I attended, and you brought parents in, and you educated the community on the risk, where you can buy, yes, please give it a round of applause.
You were there. It's so important. That's such an important component of it.
And so that's my history. The rule of law is important to me, and that is a priority that I will have as President of the United States to enforce the law again, whether it's in our cities or whether it is on the border of the United States. Let's enforce the law.
So another area that we're both familiar with as governors during COVID-19, we faced difficult decisions every single day, but all of that kind of forms, again, who we are as a leader moving forward, and I'm sure that won't be the first time that we'll face a pandemic like we did during COVID. So talk a little bit, too, about that experience and just what you brought to the table with your prior experience. Anything you do differently? I get asked that all the time. And really, what did you learn from going through that?
Wow. Probably half the people in here almost have post-traumatic stress syndrome from the pandemic. And so I don't talk about it that much, but there were decisions made during that time that, history's going to say was right or history's going to say was wrong. There's two decisions that I made that were critically important. One of them was that there was enormous national pressure to shelter in place. And I remember even President Trump and the Vice President urging us to shut down our businesses for 30 days. And I had already made the decision that I'm not going to say you're an essential business, so you get to stay open, and you're a non-essential business, so you have to close. I said, if you are a business that provides a job for a family, that makes you an essential business in my judgment. So I didn't shelter in place. I didn't define the businesses that way. And because of that, our economy recovered more quickly, but also I called a candle maker. Just recently, I was actually asking for a campaign donation. And he said, I'll be happy to, because you helped us survive during the pandemic because we stayed open. And he said, our business tripled during the pandemic. And you got to think about it. A candle maker in this world today is not essential. Some people might think that. But, and he said, though, that he stayed open and his competitors were in the Northeast and they were shut down by blue state governors. Yeah. And so that made a difference. The second decision I'll cover quickly is we kept our schools open. Now, we all went virtual. We all went virtual during that March of 2020. As a rural state, we quickly said, this is not working. It's not working for the children. Susan, my wife, is here, by the way, First Lady. And she was helping one of our grandchildren who was having to go virtual in the classroom, and it wasn't working very well. You were a little bit overwhelmed, and she was overwhelmed, my granddaughter. But we said, this is not going to work for the fall semester. And so that summer, I said, we're going to keep our classrooms open for in-classroom instruction. Teachers are going to be there. Students are going to be there. And, of course, nationally, the cases went up. I had protesters out in front of the mansion where teachers were saying, you're going to kill us, and they were in coffins. And so we stuck with it. We went to in-classroom instruction that fall, and the result was that Arkansas ranked number 2 in the nation for days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic.
It mattered. We kept our kids in school, too. Very similar experience from the pushback that we got. I have 3 daughters. One is a teacher. The other 2 are like, Mom, we're not teachers for a reason. I've got 4 children. I can't do this. We need to be back in school. So I commend you on that. It was the right thing to do. And as history has reflected, it definitely was the right thing to do. I mean, if you look at the red state governors, their kids didn't have their learning loss that states that had their kids out of school for 2 years. I mean, and just all the other issues that they're experiencing.
The social issues we're still confronting today, whether it's depression or drug use that we have, and so we're overcoming a lot. And so I applaud you, because I remember the calls, Kim, that we were on together in which we're sort of encouraging each other as governors. Let's make good decisions here. Let's keep the family safe, but also let's keep moving in our society through education and business.
Right, exactly. So we kind of talked a little bit about the fentanyl crisis and the countless number of lives that have been lost. And again, with your experience in the DEA, what can we, maybe some steps that we can take to stop that? Is it possible with an open border? And how would you pair immigration reform? How do we, it's kind of all of the above, but we've got drugs pouring across the border. Every state is a border state. We are seeing our children being impacted. What are some steps that President Hutchinson would take to stop what we're seeing at the southern border with the human trafficking and drug crisis?
I've got to start with a story because it illustrates the risk. I had a friend that went to New York, that I called him when he was in New York City. He's from Arkansas. He's in New York City, and he answers the phone. I say, "What are you doing in New York City?" And he said, "My son, who is in college, went to New York City for a ball game." Well, he did something he shouldn't have done. He went out on the street, and he bought a Percocet pill. But unknown to him, that Percocet pill was laced with fentanyl. He overdosed and he died. And so the dad was up there reclaiming the body. And so it's risky for our kids. Right. You don't know what you're getting on the street. Don't buy anything on the street, number one. Number two, what we have to do is twofold. One, we go after the supply. And secondly, you go after the addiction issues that we face in America. You did this with your town hall meeting on fentanyl. It's the education, it is the counseling, it is the support that we have to provide in a community. And then we do have to go after supply. And let's talk about that for a second. It is the cartels that are bringing the human suffering into our country through their human trafficking. And then they're also bringing fentanyl in, and that goes all across the country. And so you have to increase your border resources. You have to build greater infrastructure. I was head of the charge of border security during the Bush administration. We didn't get it perfect, but it looks perfect compared to what we see today. And so I know what needs to be done. You put the resources there, you reform our asylum laws, and you designate the cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. That is critical, and you've got to partner with Mexico to go after them. I mentioned the rule of law. Right now, they're disregarding the rule of law, and President Obrador is giving a green light to the cartels. That has to change. We have to use our economic pressure to make that change in Mexico, because we have to have their partnership to effectively go after the cartels. So I want to talk a little bit more later about immigration, if I might. Yep. But that's both education, but also going after the cartels. The precursor chemicals come from China. We can stop it in Mexico before it gets across the border.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, you know, gas prices are rising again. Inflation is still a problem. We've got a majority of Americans, 51%, are pessimistic about the economy. They think it's still in a downturn and it's getting worse. So we sent out and asked Iowans to submit questions. So Brett from Davenport wants to know, as president, what steps would you take really to lower gas and food prices? But most importantly, what does your policies look like compared to Bidenomics, which he's owning? So I don't quite understand that, but how would you address that?
I was in South Carolina when President Biden was bragging on Bidenomics. And, of course, I gave a counter message because Bidenomics basically says inflation's fine and don't worry about the interest rates. Well, inflation is cooked into your prices already. And so it's elevated, it strains your budget as a family. And then you double that by the fact that you've got higher interest rates on your credit card bills. Not that anybody here has a credit card bill, but it could be a student loan. Thank you for laughing there.
Well, I was going to tell him mine's getting a good workout when I brought the grandkids to the state fair the other day. I'm telling you, whoever decided we could refill the credit card to get the kids back on a ride, we're going to have a talk. Excuse me. Sorry.
And so the interest rates are a problem. What would I do about it? First of all, on the gas prices, it's a supply and demand issue. You produce more energy. You produce more oil. You drill for more. You increase the supply. And guess what's going to happen? We're going to be able to bring those prices down. And we don't want our president going to Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and say, please, can you produce more oil? Let's produce here in the United States of America. And then when you look at inflation, It's caused by excessive federal spending. The last big spending bill that Biden passed was $1.2 trillion that moved in our economy, that created this excessive money in our system, that it raised the inflation, that ultimately raised the cost of interest as well. And so I want to control federal spending. As a governor, we balance the budget every year, and we've got to balance the budget at the federal level.
A foreign concept to them. We're cutting taxes in Iowa because we're over collecting. You did the same thing, but in order to keep bringing the taxes down and keep returning the money back to those that we serve, we spent 82% of available revenue. It can be done, and we still invested in priorities that are important to the people that we serve. So thank you for talking about that. You want to talk a little bit about the border? Do you want to, or about immigration?
Well, actually, I wanted to announce a policy initiative.
Okay,
today.
here we go. We're at the fair. Breaking news. Breaking news.
And policy is always overshadowed by the latest controversies, but policy is important. And I trust governors because I was a governor and I know Governor Reynolds. I want Governor Reynolds to have more control over Medicaid dollars. We want to give more flexibility to you in terms of managing Medicaid dollars, having a work requirement.
Can I remove people from the rolls?
My goodness, after we've been forced to keep them on the rolls, yes. And so you're processing that now. You need to have more flexibility in our environmental regulations. We want to return more authority to the states. But my announcement today is regard to immigration. Right now, federal law, our Constitution gives the federal government responsibility for immigration policy. Well, we've delegated that to employers with employer-based visas if they have a need, but we're dependent upon them. I want to have a state-based visa program that if you in Iowa say you need to have healthcare workers or that you need to have agricultural workers that's more permanent, or if you need to have you want to concentrate on the biotech arena, you can say this is our priority. We need to have a visa program that would bring that kind of talent or workforce here into Iowa. And so a state-based visa program, and yes, we're going to make sure that the state program has security in place, that they have the right requirements in place, that right enforcement capability, and they have a standard to make sure that they comply with the visa requirements. But this helps us relieve pressure on the border. It gives us more authority with the states. That's the kind of partnership I want to have as president with our governors.
And I appreciate that because we're on the ground. We know what we need. It's not a one-size-fits-all. You realize that. We're both smaller states, but we have to operate a little bit differently. So I really appreciate that. We've really seen it in the Medicaid numbers and not being able to take anybody off the rolls during COVID and just the bloated costs. So thank you for that, and especially with the visas. I appreciate that. We were just saying, give us the opportunity, provide a waiver. This is so good so that we can make those decisions. So I really appreciate that a lot. One more quick question, and then we'll go into the fast and give you kind of 5 minutes to just really talk to Iowans. I'll give you the lead-up question, but to let you close out. So, the other thing, when you think about it, look at the growth, the bureaucracy. We've got the bureaucracy running government, and it's just bloated at the federal level. So here in Iowa, I cut 21 agencies from my cabinet, and we went from 37 down to 16, projected just in a small state, $215 million savings over 4 years, and that's conservative, I know for a fact. So how do you start to address some of that as the president to start to just deal with kind of the bloat that we see in government?
First of all, I followed you very closely in your transformation of state government. I applaud you for what you've done. And so I did that in Arkansas as well. We had 42 different departments that reported to me. I said, if I give my department heads 1 hour a week, that's 42 hours in a week before I do anything else. So we reduced that, transformed government down to 15 departments that reported to me. But during the course, it was just a very simple measure. I put in a hiring freeze when I became governor so that if somebody left, we said, can we do this more efficiently? Can we use technology? Do we need to replace them? And as a result of that, we reduced state government workers by 3,000 while I was governor. That was a 14% reduction. So as president, one of the first things that I will do is set in a hiring freeze for non-defense workers in the government bureaucracy, and my goal is to reduce federal non-defense workforce by 10%. That's going to save dollars.
That's going to save dollars.
And so that's one thing, but it also, you've got to get a control of the administrative state in Washington. Whether it's the waters of the U.S. that the Supreme Court struck down that impacts the farmers here in Iowa and your ability to manage your land and be good stewards of it, you've got to stop that over-regulation at the federal level, just like we have done as governors, to unleash business. When you look at our $32 trillion debt, we're not going to be able to get a handle on our debt unless we go to the private sector of our economy. It's got to grow. We've got to unleash them. It's by a pro-growth energy policy, a pro-growth tax policy, and it's by controlling federal spending and let the private sector create the growth in our country.
Okay, it's the fast three.
Oh, I'm in trouble
I know,
now.
I have to always say the fast three. So, okay. Give me one funny campaign moment on the trail. And, you know, there's lots of them, right? Susan, there's lots.
There are, and most of them are humiliating. I joke that voters have to humble someone before they ever will elect them. And so anyway, I'm campaigning, and I'm shaking hands here in Iowa, and I come across this lady, and I say, I'm Asa Hutchinson, running for President of the United States. And she looks at me with the greatest level of sarcasm you can imagine and says, sure, and I'm running for Vice President. So it's a
I told
humbling
you
experience.
Iowans are, you know, they take this role very seriously, right?
Rightfully said. Iowans have been great, the questions that they ask, and it's been a joy. And, of course, you've heard the story where they said, you know, you're running for President of the United States and you look normal. And I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, badge of honor. Okay, you've been on the fairgrounds, but favorite food you've had or looking forward to having?
Well, Susan and I have to have our caramel apples. So
Okay,
we're
oh, they
going to
look
go
good.
on a
Yay.
hunt for our caramel apples. But I will say I went to the What You Smokin'
Woo!
barbecue, and I had their brisket. So I love that place, and I would recommend that as a fair food.
I think it's got one of the new ones, right? The Iowa Twinkie or something that has nothing to do with sugar. It's brisket and pepper, and it's a must-have. Your favorite walkout song?
Well, you know, whenever I announced for president in Arkansas, we had Chris Stapleton's Arkansas playing as my walkout song. But I'm going to switch, and I want to do Wild Thing. Wild Thing.
Asa, you are so
by
funny.
The Troggs. and the reason is, this is important. This is a symbol here.
Okay.
That Wild Thing was the theme song or the walkout song in the movie Major League. Remember that?
Oh.
Charlie Sheen played the player, and he was a little bit wild, but he was the closer. He was the closer pitcher, and they played Wild Thing. And so I'm the closer in this political campaign. I'm going to close out strong.
That's awesome. I am really going to have to give more thought to a walkout song. I'm not doing it justice. Okay, so this is the final question. It's really your chance to talk to Iowans, and we've got people from out of state here too. So, you know, as I travel the state, Iowans tell me that they want a leader that will stand up for the American people, for our country, our values, and our freedoms. And they want somebody that has the moral conviction to do the right thing, like during COVID when it's really hard, a vision and resolve to deliver beginning on day one. Most importantly, they want someone that can win. So tell us why you think that you are that person.
America needs a president that sets the example for character and integrity. We need that in our country today. We need it desperately. We need leadership that brings out the best of America and does not appeal to our worst instincts. That is leadership, and that's what we need in the White House. Now, I'll also say that there's important issues that we have to address. And so I'm running for president because I believe in the rule of law in this country. And so it is law enforcement. Secondly, I know that we have to address the economy. I have the skill set to bring to fix the challenges that we face, whether it's fentanyl, whether it is the balancing the budget that is needed in our country, or whether it is a belief that America can be free and that we can lead again. And I'll tell you that I am a Reagan Republican, which means I believe in the strength of America, and when you want peace in this world, you have to be strong. That's a fundamental principle. We're not isolationists, we're not withdrawing, but we're leading the free world. And we do it in a way that we can afford, but it is moral leadership. It's leading by our goodness. It's leading by our example. It's leading by the strength of our democracy. And so I'm running for president because I believe in that office that sets the ideals for our future of freedom, of goodness, and the American character.
Oh, let's give one big more round of applause for Asa Hutchinson running for President of the United States. Asa, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Y'all get out and work this year.
And you can